Okay, so we're back here in the words of Rabbi Tatz, as he's explaining to us the different ways that the Rishonim, the earliest commentators, view the idea of Yediyah, Hashem's foreknowledge, versus the idea of BECHIRA, that each and every one of us has free will to decide and choose whatever we want. So the Rambam, if you'll recall from last time, he basically makes the following argument, and that is, there is Hashem's foreknowledge completely, and there is free will completely, and the human mind can simply not grasp exactly how that's going to work, but it's not a contradiction in the two things existing at the same time, because in the omniscient and omnipotent world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where everything does make sense, in His world there are no difficulties. It's only in the small human mind that cannot stretch to the boundaries of Hashem's thinking that sees it as a major paradox and is troubled by it. So Rabbi Tatz explains right now so that we should understand a little bit more. And he says like this. As we pointed out, the Rambam is not really answering the question. That's number one, because there's not an answer over here. The truth of the matter is, as we said, the question is really dissolving, meaning you think there's a contradiction between free will and Hashem's foreknowledge. The answer is there's no contradiction. And the reason there's no contradiction is because you can't understand. So basically the Rambam is saying whatever question you thought you had is not really a question. Now, the truth says Rav Tatz that even though that all of the later authorities will use the Rambam as the point of departure to explain their understanding of BECHIRA, free will, and foreknowledge, so everybody agree, and they might differ from what the Rambam is saying, but everybody agrees on the following fundamentals. Number one, Hashem is above space and time. He is all of reality. And despite that humans are in some way given the space in which to exist and despite that, humans are in some way given the space in which to exist and to choose. Meaning Hashem is everything. He's all of reality. He fills up the entire universe with His essence and with His being. Nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has kind of like wedged out a space in the world in which man can exist on his own and be able to choose as a result of the space that he's in this world. And therefore he writes that the underlying principle of the process of creation is that humans are created as independent beings, and this independence comes to expression most importantly and most explicitly in the human faculty of BECHIRA, free will. So part of the creation is that we are independent beings, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not forcing us or pushing us or pulling us in any direction. And the way that we express our independence and the way that we express that we are human and what we can do in the greatest way is in how we use our BECHIRA, our free will, to express that. So he goes on and he explains like this, that this subject is fundamental, and yet it's very easily misunderstood. And if you err on the side of this delicate balance, it will have very serious consequences. And that's why many commentaries, as we're going to see, they speak in veiled terms. They're not very explicit. Or they openly state that more should be hidden than be revealed. Meaning that the concept of fusing together this great paradox of Hashem's Yediyah, His foreknowledge, and our free will, is so difficult for a person to understand, it's kind of better to let things be just silent. And he writes, as we're going to see momentarily in the Raavad, who is one of the main criticizers of the Rambam, the Raavad himself writes that silence would have been better in this situation. And the Rambam, in another one of his works, he writes over there that he would have preferred to remain silent on this matter, but of course, because so many people ask the question, and it's a source of consternation for many theological, philosophical minds, so the Rambam had to say what he had to say, kind of to quell the question and put people at ease. And therefore he just points out that according to the Rambam, these are the things that everybody agrees and accepts. Hashem knows in advance, we all have free will, and the nature of God's knowledge is incomprehensible to us. That's it. Hashem knows we have free will, but we cannot grasp the mind or the intellectual abilities of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we'll never really understand how it works. But as the Rambam says, suffice to say, it does work, and therefore all you have to know is that you have free will every step of the way, that you take advantage of it. That's the Rambam. Now, like I said, one of his major opponents is someone by the name of the Raavad, Rabbi Avram ben Dovid, I believe was the name. He was a contemporary. They lived pretty much at the same time. The Rambam was 1138 to 1204, and the Raavad was 1125 to 1198. So they overlapped. They were in the same historical period. And when he saw the words of the Rambam, he was very bothered. And he writes over there that what kind of a pursuit of wisdom is this that the Rambam is coming to offer us? If you're going to ask a question from an intellectual point of view or a theological point of view, if you want to teach us something, then you should have an answer to that question. Meaning, I'm not going to present a thesis of wisdom to you, says the Raavad, if at the end of the day I can't answer the question. A guy writes a doctorate to go become a doctor, and he has no answer to the question that he starts off the paper with. Well, so you go back to school. You're not a doctor. You don't have an answer. The guy has a complicated case in law, and he goes back and forth, and he has no answer to how to solve the case. So we tell you, go back to law school. You're not a lawyer. If the Rambam is claiming to be the master philosopher over here, who can answer the deepest question in theology, which is one of the greatest conundrums of our thought, and then he doesn't answer the question because he just says, well, you can't understand anyway, so there's no question. So the Raavad says, then what chesed are you doing to the world by asking questions you can't answer? And so the Raavad takes the Rambam to task over here, and he says over the following idea. And the Raavad says like this: Im hayud sidkas ha'adam v'rishoim teluyim begezeres habar yisbarach. If the righteousness of a man or the wickedness of a man was something that was dependent upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, haynu oimrim shediyasu gzera. So then we would say that the yediyah, the knowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has of what is going to happen to a person in their life, whether they will be righteous or they will be wicked, it must mean that his knowledge is already the gezerah, the decree itself, to what is going to happen to this person. Then we have a very difficult question over here. How can you tell me that a person has free will if you're telling me that Hashem's foreknowledge is already deciding through his decrees if the person is going to be righteous or is going to be wicked? So then it's already decided and the person has no free will. Says the Raavad, that's a problem. The achshav shabare hisir zu hamemshala miyadai umasr biyada adam atzmai en yidiyasa gezer. So the Raavad now has to come from a different angle than the Rambam. And he says the following words: then Habari, the creator of the world, Hashem, removes his jurisdiction over this particular person, umasra biyana adam atzma, and he gives it into the hands of the person himself to do with his life whatever he would like to do with his life. Ein yediyasa gzerasai gezera, and then you see, says the Raavad, that his knowledge is not a decree in this case. Meaning, Hashem transfers over the control to make decisions into the hands of the individual himself, and that way we say, you have free will. I myself, Hashem says, I'm not decreeing anything upon you. It's totally up to you, and therefore my foreknowledge, you're still going to have to deal according to the Raavad. So where does foreknowledge come into play then? But it's not my foreknowledge that's creating the decree, it's you who has the free will in your hand. Well, if that's the case, So then, according to the Raavad, where exactly does Hashem have this yediyah, this foreknowledge of what's going to happen? If, according to this right now, he just gave everything over to the man, Hashem's knowledge is kind of out of the picture. So he explains, Kleimar, it means to say, Ha'elokim hirchik es atzmaim mishlita kan ba'olam. Hashem removes himself, he removes himself from the dominance in this particular part of the world. Hirchik es atzmai me'atuchum shel BECHIRA enoshis. He distances himself from the spiritual boundaries of a person's BECHIRA, of their free will. Kedei la'avshir l'ratzayin shel b'nei adam liv'o b'chavshiyas, in order to allow that a man's desire and his will and his free will can work in a chavshis, in a free will type of a way. And that means that the God's foreknowledge, or we're going to see in one moment, but basically the way that he's explaining in the Raavad is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be free will. So the only way that there can be free will is if he finds a way to distance himself from the actions of mankind. So what does he do? He lets go of the reins, even though that he's the all-powerful God, and he knows everything that's going to happen. He lets go of the reins so that when this person is in a situation where his free will is being tested, he has the power to make the decision that he wants to make. If that's the case, and this is where the Raavad is going to get a little bit tricky, how then does Hashem have foreknowledge? Because if you say that Hashem does not have foreknowledge, that means he's not all-powerful, and he's not all-knowing. And we said before that that's one of the basic tenets of our faith, that Hashem is all-powerful and he is all-knowing. So now you're saying he gives over the reins to the man. That means he has no idea what man is going to do. He's leaving it all overall to him, so that he doesn't really know what's going to happen. So it says the Raavad, Ki yidias ha'itstagninam, the knowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has is like an astrologer. Just like an astrologer has some supernatural force, where he knows what's going to happen to this person before it's going to happen. He looks in his crystal ball, she looks in her crystal ball, she reads the lines that are on the hand, she has some incantation that she says, so therefore she's able to look and foresee what's going to be in the future. She has powers that are coming from someplace else. It doesn't negate the fact that the way that that person got to that place that the astrologer knows about right now came about through their free will, which takes place later on down the road. Says the Raavad, since that HaKadosh Baruch Hu removes himself from the free will process, the fact that he knows what's going to happen later on in this person's life is not because he's pushing him or deciding or decreeing that it's going to be like that, but rather he's no less than the astrologer who, through their own supernatural forces, is able to foresee the future, but that future is only going to happen based upon the actions of the person themselves, what they do right now, or in 5 minutes, or an hour, or in 2 minutes, or 5 years, but Hashem knows that already. So the Rambam, and this not everybody likes this, the Raavad answers over here that that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like an astrologer. Basically what he's saying over here. Now let's just see the way that Rabbi Tatz is going to explain these very difficult words in the Raavad. And he says like this: when an astrologer sees forces in motion and he accurately predicts their outcome, it could be said that he knows the future, but he's in no way the cause. Whatever the astrologer is tapped into the creation, the spiritual aspects of this world, he knows what's going on. Somehow he knows what's going on. But when he predicts what's going to take place, he himself is not the cause of the future that is going to end up taking place. An experienced professional observing a course of events in his field of expertise may know the inevitability of its outcome, but his observation plays no part in it at all. A guy's a doctor, and he has seen this particular condition 1,000 times. And 99.9% of the times, this condition, if it's not treated the right way, it becomes fatal. So he knows that already. So is it he's decreeing that the person who came into the ER and ended up getting in there too late before that window of time where they could save his life, then 20 minutes later when the guy dies and the doctor says, I knew that's going to happen, he created the guy's death? No, he knows from previous events what is going to happen in this person's life, or what's going to happen in this particular situation, so he can foresee somehow into the future to know what's going to be. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the world. He made mankind. He knows the way that human beings operate. And therefore, it's not a chiddush, it's not a novel concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu be able to peer into the future and know basically what's going to be in the life of a person based on their situations and so forth in life, and know what it is they're going to choose. And the famous example that they give very often is, if I give a child a choice between a lollipop and a carrot, so any healthy, normal child is going to pick the lollipop and not the carrot. So when I put them out in both my hands over here, lollipop or carrot, I know already beforehand the kid's going to pick the lollipop. So I'm a prophet? I forced the kid to choose the lollipop? No, it's just that the choices that were out there, it's pretty obvious what he's going to choose. So even before it happens, I'm pretty much well aware of what the choice is going to be. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is setting up all of the situations in the world in a person's life. Whatever's happening in my life is not happening by itself. Hashem's not the astrologer just waiting to see what's going to happen. He's setting up all the details. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets up all the details. He knows already in advance through his astrological view of my life in the world, basically what I'm going to choose. So it's not because he's forcing me to choose something. It's not that he's pushing me to choose something. It's not because his yediyah, his knowledge, is being geyser, is decreeing what's going to be. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is setting up all of the parameters, and then, based on those parameters that Hashem sets up, so I'm just going to make the decision. That's the obvious decision, which Hashem already knew in his astrological mind. Says Rav Tatz, Hashem knows future human choices from the outside, so to speak, remaining separate from those choices. He knows what's going to be, but he's not a part of the choice itself. His knowledge is not a casual decree. It's not a decree. His knowledge is not a decree. It is not more than a detached observation. It's just, you're sitting back, watching everything play itself. It's like for example, the mashal, the parable that we gave before. If you saw the movie 5 times already, and you know the key parts of what's going to happen, so as you're sitting there watching it, you already know in your mind's eye what's going to take place in the next scene. You're not directing the movie. You're not guiding the movie. You're not telling the actor over there what to do in it. You just happen to know what's going to happen because you saw it already. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has seen everything already. He knows you very well already. So he knows that when he sets up certain situations in your life, that's going to be the decision that you're going to make. So knowledge in advance does not have to be a cause. Foreknowledge is not the same thing as destiny. Destiny is more what the Rambam seems to be saying, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's foreknowledge is absolute, but your free will is absolute as well. How's it going to work? You'll never understand. Leave it up to Hashem. He'll be able to distinguish between the two, but you have free will. This foreknowledge, the way that the Raavad is explaining it is that Hashem does in fact know in advance what you're going to choose. Nevertheless, he has nothing to do with your decision. He left it up to you. Now he sets up the situation, he sets up all the details and the parameters, and puts you in a situation where you have to make a decision. But Hashem only sets up the details. Your job is to make the decision. How are you going to make the decision? You're making. He's removed himself from that process. He gave it over all to you, and therefore, according to the Raavad, man, we would say that he's coming to explain that man has a very strong hold in the world of BECHIRA, free will, And it's almost like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us, like he's saying, he's sitting in the background, kind of watching, very much not involved. So for those that need to have a strongest feeling of free will, that I'm really making a decision, absolute decision on my own, the Raavad will afford you that ability to understand that, because he's saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu is on the outside, peripheral, and you're on the inside, and you're the one that's making everything happen the way that it's happening right now, because you're a Baal Bechira, you're a creature of total and absolute free will. So that is, in a nutshell, that is the Raavad's argument on the Rambam. And he's, again, like we say from the beginning, he criticizes the Rambam that the Rambam asked a question which is a massive theological question, and he doesn't really give an answer according to Raavad. The Rambam would say, I don't have to give an answer because there really is no answer, and that's the answer that I'm giving. My answer is that you'll never understand, so why even asking the question? And the Raavad says, well, if you're going to ask the question, you have to give some kind of an answer, and therefore my answer is Hashem's astrological. And an astrologer is able to know what's going to happen in the future, even before it happens, based on his in-depth knowledge and connection to the world. Just like a person who's an expert in a certain field, he knows more or less what's going to happen if things go this way. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets up all the details in your life and all the scenarios, and he knows you, and he knows the history of the world. He more or less already from the beginning, he knows what's going to happen. Foreknowledge is, he knows what's going to happen, but he's not controlling what's going to happen. That's all up to you and your BECHIRA, your free will. So we'll leave it at the Raavad today, and we'll prepare ourselves for the Rivash, who is the next commentary that we're going to see in the next class, Be'ez Hashem. And we'll let you off for good behavior early today.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you Wednesday.
Yes, looking forward. Hopefully in person, God willing.